We assume the Sumerians believed in a soul the way we do. They didn't. What they described was older, stranger, and stayed here after death. They had a name for it, and they described exactly what it could do to the living. According to some of the oldest written records on Earth, the dead were not always gone. Sometimes they came back. Sumerian civilization emerged in southern Mesopotamia during the late 4th millennium BCE, pioneering the earliest system of writing. Among the thousands of cuneiform tablets recovered from ancient city-states like Ur and Nippur, scribes recorded a highly complex and unsettling view of what happens after the heart stops. Modern viewers often assume that ancient cultures shared our familiar concept of an immortal soul, an ethereal, pure essence that leaves the physical world behind to ascend to a higher realm. But the clay tablets tell a different story. In the Sumerian language, the surviving element of a deceased person was called the Gidim. In later Akkadian texts, this entity became known as the Etemmu. The texts describe the Etemmu not as an abstract, formless soul, but as a literal, ghost-like remnant of the dead. The Sumerians believed this spirit remained anchored to the physical world, maintaining its individual identity, its memories, and its physical needs. It did not cleanly depart to a distant paradise. Instead, the dead entered a dark, subterranean underworld known as Irkalla, yet they kept a direct, fragile connection to the soil above. The transition to the afterlife was not a release from the burdens of physical existence, but a continuation of them under far more bleak conditions. According to these ancient records, the boundary between life and death was porous. The Etemmu was entirely dependent on the living for its survival. It required continuous nourishment in the form of food and water. Without these physical offerings, the spirit would starve, wither, and eventually grow desperate. The tablets suggest that a neglected, hungry Etemmu would not simply fade away into oblivion. It would claw its way back to the surface, seeking out the very relatives who had abandoned it, bringing illness, nightmares, and misfortune in its wake. The dead possessed a terrifying agency. This belief transformed the dead from a passive memory into an active, dangerous category of existence. To the Sumerians, the deceased were never truly gone. They were merely waiting, and their survival remained the terrifying responsibility of the living. The stakes of this relationship were absolute. A single forgotten ritual, a single missed offering of water, could turn a beloved family member into an aggressive, haunting presence. The story of these lingering spirits belongs to the flat, sun-baked plains of southern Mesopotamia. Here, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Sumerian civilization first formed, with its earliest urban settlements taking root between 4500 BCE and 4000 BCE. These early city-states did not merely build temples and canals, they developed a revolutionary technology to organize their expanding world. Around 3200 BCE, the first clay tablets appeared, marked with the earliest known system of writing. This system, which we call cuneiform, used a wedge-shaped stylus pressed into wet clay. While it began as a tool for administrative accounts and grain ledgers, cuneiform soon evolved into a medium capable of recording abstract ideas, religious myths, and existential fears. Without these durable clay archives, the spiritual world of the Sumerians would have vanished entirely, leaving only silent graves. Instead, the scribes of ancient Mesopotamia created a permanent, readable record of their thoughts on mortality. These tablets bypass modern assumptions, showing what the surviving record actually preserves. Through these inscriptions, we encounter a worldview where the dead were neither completely gone nor entirely at peace, but captured in clay for thousands of years. For the families of ancient Mesopotamia, the physical end of life marked the beginning of an eternal domestic duty. Proper burial of the body was the absolute first requirement. To leave a corpse unburied was to condemn the spirit to immediate, restless wandering on the surface of the earth. Once the body was committed to the ground, often beneath the very floors of the family home, the relationship between the living and the dead transitioned into a structured, permanent phase. The Sumerians established an elaborate funerary offering system known as kispu. This ritual was a recurring, lifelong obligation, rather than a symbolic, one-time farewell. The household became a space of perpetual maintenance for those who had passed. Every month, during the dark of the moon, family members gathered to perform these rites. They poured fresh water down clay libation pipes that traveled directly into the subterranean graves. They offered bread, beer, and oil, placing physical food onto small household altars to sustain their ancestors. In the logic of the Mesopotamian home, the dead did not transcend their physical needs. They simply experienced them from beneath the soil. Remembrance was a daily labor of survival. To forget was to invite a starving, desperate visitor back across the threshold. Sumerian funerary customs lacked any concept of closure. The living could not cleanly sever their relationship with the deceased. Instead, interment marked a transition into a permanent state of domestic dependence. The surviving family members found themselves bound to a relentless intergenerational cycle of maintenance. Surviving cuneiform lists detail the daily provisions required to keep the ancestral spirits quiet, a steady, practical ration of bread, beer, and oil. These were not symbolic gestures of grief, but the literal necessities of life delivered to the grave day after day. This system turned the Mesopotamian household into a shared space occupied by the living above and the dead below. It was a relationship built on absolute reciprocity. The living provided the physical sustenance that the subterranean spirits could no longer gather for themselves, while the dead, in theory, offered protection to the home. But this meant the burden of care was eternal. If a family line died out, or if a busy descendant neglected the routine, the ancestral bond fractured. Without their bread and beer, the ancestors would starve. The texts suggest that a starving spirit did not quietly fade away. It grew restless, desperate, and increasingly dangerous to the household that had broken its promise. When a family in ancient Mesopotamia began to experience sudden misfortune, they did not look for natural coincidences. The physical survival of the household was intimately tied to the unseen world, and any sudden disruption was often viewed as a sign that the boundary between the living and the dead had ruptured. The surviving cuneiform records show that the ancient Mesopotamians lived with a constant awareness that a neglected ancestral spirit could express its anger through tangible, destructive means. The texts describe these visitations not as fleeting, harmless shadows, but as highly disruptive physical and mental afflictions. A family member might suddenly succumb to a burning fever, or a child might suffer from violent, unexplained seizures. In the silent hours of the night, the household might be plagued by terrifying, recurring nightmares, or the sound of scratching and disembodied voices echoing through the clay walls. The Sumerians believed that these were not random sicknesses, but the direct, hostile actions of a starving Etemmu that had bypassed the threshold of the home. To categorize this terrifying intersection of physical disease and spiritual aggression, ancient scholars and physicians developed a specific vocabulary. In medical and magical tablets, including those belonging to the vast collection known as the Utuku Lemnutu, various bodily and mental torments are explicitly attributed to the dead. The scribes used the Akkadian phrase katu Etemmu, which literally means the hand of the ghost, to classify conditions that defied physical explanation. When a person's limbs shook uncontrollably or when their ears rang with a persistent, maddening buzz, the texts indicate that the physician did not look to bodily fluids alone. Instead, they suspected that a physical hand belonging to a lingering spirit was actively grasping the patient from within. The suffering of a single individual quickly became a crisis for the entire family. In these ancient communities, a household was an economic and spiritual unit, and if the head of the family fell ill or was tormented by waking visions, the fields could not be tended and the domestic order collapsed. The Maklu texts, which record a long tradition of dealing with hostile spiritual forces, document the profound anxiety of families who believed their domestic spaces had been invaded. The inscriptions suggest that a household under siege by an Etemmu was a place of deep psychological dread, where every cold draft or sudden noise was a reminder of a broken familial obligation. The cuneiform records reveal a world where the living were constantly vulnerable to the hunger of their ancestors. This belief system did not view death as a clean break, but as a permanent, fragile arrangement that required absolute vigilance. If that vigilance wavered, the household paid a devastating price. The symptoms recorded on the clay tablets depict a desperate struggle for peace in a home where the dead had reclaimed their place among the living, converting their neglect into a physical force of torment. The most unsettling part was not death itself. It was neglect. A forgotten dead person was believed to become dangerous, not because they were evil, but because they had been abandoned. To identify this unseen source of suffering, Mesopotamian healers bypassed physical anatomy. The texts describe a specific condition known in Akkadian as katu Etemmu, literally the hand of the ghost. This diagnostic phrase served as the formal link between physical disease and ritual neglect in the written medical tradition. When a patient exhibited sudden fevers, shivering limbs, or a persistent ringing in the ears, the Sagig diagnostic manual did not attribute the symptoms to natural fluids. Instead, the clay tablets suggest that an invisible hand was actively grasping the sufferer. The physician's primary task was to determine which ancestor had been forgotten. In this worldview, bodily torment was a direct symptom of broken family obligations. To release the patient, the household had to locate the neglected grave, pour fresh water, and offer the bread and beer that the starving spirit had been denied. To confront a lingering Etemmu, Mesopotamian families turned to a specialized ritual priest known as the Ashipu. These exorcists did not rely on improvisation or folk magic. Instead, they operated as practical technicians of the unseen, executing precise step-by-step instructions recorded on clay tablets. The surviving cuneiform manuals prescribe a systematic sequence to neutralize the hostile spirit. First, the Ashipu conducted purification rites, using incense and water to seal the thresholds of the home. Next, the priest performed binding spells, reciting formulas designed to name the ghost and legally restrict its movement. The texts show that the specialist would often construct a small clay figurine to serve as a physical vessel for the spirit. By trapping the Etemmu within the clay, the priest could safely transport it away from the living. The ritual concluded with reconciliation rather than destruction. The specialist buried the figurine and restored the kispu offerings, delivering the long-denied bread and beer to appease the spirit's hunger. Through these documented procedures, Sumerian and Babylonian healers sought to restore balance, turning a terrifying haunting back into a quiet, structured obligation. This reconstruction of Mesopotamian belief does not rely on modern speculation or creative imagination. Instead, the argument is built entirely on the careful translation of surviving written records. The Sumerians believed that the relationship between the living and the dead was defined by physical and legal obligations. To map this worldview, historians examine multiple distinct streams of evidence: Sumerian funerary texts, cuneiform burial inscriptions, Mesopotamian ghost texts, medical incantation tablets, ritual instructions, and royal inscriptions. The texts describe a reality where the dead remained a constant, active presence. This system of belief is further preserved in the legendary Gilgamesh traditions and is physically verified by archaeological evidence, such as the stone libation basins uncovered in the ruins of ancient homes. The inscriptions suggest that these clay documents were practical, everyday records of survival rather than abstract mythology. Today, thousands of Sumerian and Mesopotamian tablets survive. Many are preserved in institutions such as the British Museum in London, the Louvre in Paris, and the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. These fragile clay records continue to reveal how some of humanity's earliest civilizations understood death, memory, and the unseen world. By analyzing these fragile clay surfaces, scholars perform a meticulous, line-by-line translation that serves as the essential bridge from ancient sign to historical meaning. These records allow us to hear the literal voices of the scribes who, thousands of years ago, committed their deepest existential fears to clay. The linguistic transition from Sumerian to Akkadian did not erase these concepts. Akkadian scribes adopted the Sumerian logogram for the Giddim, translating it directly into their own language as the Etemmu. For over 2,000 years, generations of Mesopotamian scholars copied these clay documents, preserving the belief that the dead remained tethered to the physical world. Later Akkadian compilations, such as Utuku Lemnutu and the First Millennium Ritual series Maklu, describe how the threat of the ghost's hand was believed to remain unchanged. These writers did not invent a new theology. They acted as guardians of an ancient, unbroken legacy. The fear of the neglected dead survived the rise and fall of empires, keeping the old obligations active in the clay. Today, thousands of Sumerian and Mesopotamian tablets survive. Many are preserved in institutions such as the British Museum in London, the Louvre in Paris, and the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. These fragile clay records continue to reveal how some of humanity's earliest civilizations understood death, memory, and the unseen world. The Sumerians may not have believed in a soul that escaped the world. Instead, they imagined something that remained, watching, waiting, dependent on the living. And in the oldest cities on Earth, that possibility was taken.